Good evening and welcome to another edition of Speaker Circle. This evening, I have with me a world renowned speaker, author, a veteran, and someone who is an expert on how to unify. Please join me as I welcome Mr. Lee Escobar.
Hey,
Thank
how
you
you
for joining us today.
doing? It's awesome to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Great. Just to share a little bit about you and how phenomenal you are with our audience, Lee has over 15,000 hours of speaking experience on stages across the world. He nets close to over seven figures a year with his speaking career. So that just lets you know when he is speaking, he knows exactly what he's talking about. He's gone through it with experience. And one of his passions and what we're discussing today is how to use language to unify rather than divide. So tell us a little bit of how you even started speaking.
Well, it all started originally in church. Became a Christian at the age of 14, and I would always say people on stage say, "I want to preach," and so that was the road that led me to actually being on stage and speaking and all that. And then what ended up happening was, I always wanted to be an Army chaplain. So I went into the military, had a problem with my shins and knees. And so what ended up happening was I had to do something. I couldn't go active duty. And so I started working in a restaurant. And when I was working in that restaurant, doing pretty well, moved up to a part owner in time. But I knew that stream of income wouldn't last forever. So I started searching for another stream of income. And I saw an infomercial on TV. And the infomercial was talking about how to invest in real estate. Just felt connected with it. And I went to a 3-day seminar. And it was funny because when I was at that 3-day seminar, I said, I want to do that one day. I want to do that. I knew nothing about real estate investing, but it was something I wanted to do. It just was in me.
And you felt that vibe, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And then I actually invested into their training courses, started crushing it as a real estate investor, doing 6 figures of a year just with real estate, flipping houses and stuff. Not as a realtor, but as an investor. And then I've always had a heart to teach. So what I did was I asked them, hey, can I be a mentor for the company? And they allowed me to be a mentor where I'd go into people's hometowns and work with them one-on-one for 4 days to set up their investing business. And then they had an opportunity for the 3-day events like I was invited to. And I said, I talked to them, they let me do it. And the rest was history. So I started on stage speaking. And then also I would do my military stuff, once a month in the reserves. And that was 16 years ago. Since then, I've done 640 3-day events where it's just me on stage for 3 days, speaking 8 hours a day.
Wow.
And so for those 3 days, and there's a sales component to it, of course. And so companies have hired me out, paying me what people would consider a fortune. And I'm just very grateful for that. To use language, to use words in a way to help people move them into what they want, and to help them get out of the way. Yeah. And, a lot of people look at sales as a negative thing. And, I always tell people Jesus was the greatest salesman in the world. And basically sales is nothing more than giving people what they want and helping them see things that they've never wanted, that they never even knew they wanted before. But there's positive and negative for everything. The negative side of sales is the unethical side of sales is trying to make people get things that they don't want. The ethical side is helping people get out of their way to really get what they want. And so, and of course, we always focus on the ethical way. So, yeah.
Exactly. And that's all about needs matching. I have a sales background as well. And for me, when my sales career really took off is when I divorced my thoughts and desires and truly listened to what people needed. Because as a person, you may think, I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that, but that's not the needs of your client. So it's so appropriate to talk about unifying. A lot of times we try to impose our beliefs and thoughts on people. So give us some examples, just practical things. If you're not a salesperson, even just talking on day-to-day, what are some examples of language you can use to unify instead of being so divisive?
Great question. And a couple things. And actually, you actually mentioned one, which is what your posture is. For instance, if you're coming from a place of defense all the time, then you're going to come from a place that's going to take away from a unifying language. It's actually going to create divisiveness, because when you defend yourself, like in court, you got to show me. This is the way it is, and what has to be done. Whereas if you come from the mindset of service, how can I serve you? How can I help you as you're talking to people? Then you come from a place of unification, because service is unification. And and sales is nothing more than, again, helping people see things and getting people to move in a certain direction. And that's what language is. The reason why this is near and dear to my heart is because most people are unaware that they're using divisive language because their intentions are good. They're unaware. Like, for example,
that's a great point.
Yeah. For example, years ago, and I'm not perfect at all this stuff. I'm growing like everyone else. The only difference is I get to go on stage and practice it more often than other people do. And so, like, I used to sit in a restaurant, and I would say, yeah, I want this, I want that, and then people would say, why are you being so rude? And I'm like, I'm not being rude. And they said, yes, you are. I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yes, you are. And then that would cause, a little conflict there. And the reason why I couldn't see myself being rude was because my intention wasn't to be good. And if your intent, or to be rude, I should say, and if your intention isn't to be rude, and you feel like you're doing good, you're just then someone can come to you all day long and say you're being, you're being divisive right now, and you're saying, no, I'm not. And the key there is because the language and the tonality is what's bringing the rudeness or the divisiveness in that scenario, not necessarily the words. Because remember, they've done studies, and tonality and body language is the majority of what people see. They don't always remember what you say, but they remember what they feel about you. And so this is why it's near and dear to my heart, is because a lot of people are unaware that they're using divisive language because their intentions are good. And so then the question becomes, how do we know if we're using divisive language or unifying language or not? And to me, it's just a simple answer. I had a young lady one time, her name is Sarah, and she taught me a lot. And she said, she calls it the ouch factor. Anytime you just feel an ouch when someone says something, or someone says something to you and you feel an ouch, then that right there is causing some kind of divisiveness. And here's the crazy thing about language. It's not always what we say, it's how a person interprets that word. So the first thing of divisive language and how to unify is, number one, are you coming from a place of defense or a place of service, like you mentioned? And the other one is definitions. This is what I mean by people being unaware of their being divisive or not. I'll give you an example. I was watching a debate on TV, and they were discussing Jesus, and they were discussing what the color of Jesus was. And one person was saying, Jesus is black, or Jesus is this color. And they were coming, Jesus was olive, and they were coming to that. And the two individuals, when they were having a discussion, one person was like, it doesn't matter what color Jesus was. I'm saved. I'm a Christian, and I can't go back in history and find out. And the person who cared about what the color Jesus was said, no, you have to care because it messes up history. And they couldn't even have a conversation. And finally, here's what they realized. The definition of Jesus was different. To the spiritual person, he was the savior of the world. And so the key was an internal salvation. To the other person who cared more about the color, which is not right or wrong, they were coming from a historic perception. So their view of Jesus was he's a historic figure. And because it's historic, not savior of the world, then yes, well, the color mattered more than anything else. But then when the other person came from a spiritual perspective, which is savior of the world, it wasn't as much of an issue for that person. But then when they got on the same page with definition, then they could have an intelligent conversation. I saw the same thing the other day, another debate. Two individuals were talking, and of the same race. And one person said, black people. And the person says, I'm not black. They're the same race. I'm African American. Another person came up with another definition. They couldn't even have a conversation until they had a definition of who they were at first, because no matter what they said was conflict. So anytime there's an ouch factor in any type of conversation, the second thing to look at, besides am I serving or am I defending, is do we have the same definition of the word?
Wow. Do we have the same definition? And then the ouch factor. That's
So
powerful.
as soon as you have an ouch, what happened there? Two things.
We actually have a great question for you already. Like, And please continue to drop your questions.
Yeah.
And this is from Galen, and she's awesome. Thank you so much for listening. She always tunes in. Where is the fine line between being clear and exact and offending by being too aggressive? And I'm assuming even when you're in a position of leadership, sometimes you do have to change the tonality of your voice to let people know you're not, this is not a joke, right? But I love that. It's a great question, Galen. What's that fine line?
The fine line is, what's your outcome? What do you desire to have out of that conversation? Remember, language always creates an outcome, or a result, whether we want it to or not. There's something the other person will interpret from it. So you want to ask yourself before you even have that conversation, what is my outcome? Do I want everyone to come together, or do I want people to spread apart? And yeah, there are times you might have to just be very firm and say, no, this is how you can be firm and unifying at the same time. So that's where a lot of people, and myself, made a mistake. If you're firm in your tonality, that means you're being mean. Not necessarily. What are you saying? For example, you need to change your life. You need to get it together. You got to make, you know what? Actually, let's do this. Here's a great example of that. Remember that example number? I sent you an email with 2 examples. Put up example number 2. No, this is a perfect example. Thank you.
Here we go.
And, all right. Where's it at right now? Okay, here it is. So this was something that happened recently. And this was an email that went out. There was mistakes that were made on some administrative work. And the leader went back and said this: all the administrators need to get organized and on the same page, or this will fail. You must figure out a solution. All right. So let's kind of dissect this a little bit. Number 1, your group. They already know they made a mistake. They know things went wrong. So when you come at them more, I guess I'll just use the easy term, spanking them or come a little bit harder on them. Now it's easy to say, I already know I messed up. Just quit telling me how I messed up. I already know that. When a person comes to an awareness that they made a mistake, there's no need to keep hammering in, right? And so number 1. Number 2, it's always about threat versus desire. So this is something that we all can use. In our language, are we creating desire or threat?
Wow.
And so
and I'd love for you to give a little example of what that is, because you're right. And especially if you're in a leadership position, it's easier for people to be firm, to give a threat. That's how we're wired. People move in fear.
Exactly. So the first thing we have to establish is which one moves people first, threat or desire. And I'm going to keep using this as an example. Another thing is love versus fear. Some people use fear in language to move them, but the Bible says perfect love casts out all fear. Love is greater than fear. And I was thinking about this the other day. Every ruler in history, well, I won't say all. That's another thing about language. Don't always use absolutes, because there's an exception to every rule.
That is so true. Absolutes are a way to be divisive.
Yes,
you're
that's divisive.
Doing this, or you never listen to me. You never, or I never have a choice.
That's right. Yeah. And so then what do people say? Well, that's not true. And they're defensive. Right.
And then the tonality changes. You're right.
There you are. So always stay away from absolutes. Say most of the time I feel that you're always and it kind of starts bringing togetherness. So an example is, most of rulers who ruled in fear, just as a metaphor, were stabbed behind the back or murdered. But if you rule in love, people die for you. Rule in love, people will die for you. Rule through fear, it's easy for people to stab you in the back. So we go back to this, and I'm answering the question that was just brought up through this example, but also bringing principles, because if we understand the principles of what people say and do, it is so much easier to take it from one sentence or one paragraph and apply it to everyday life. This is an example. So let's go to threat language. All the administrators need. When you start saying you need to, you have to, you better, that's threat language. And that's an everyday language. Hey, you need to go to the store. We use it. That's an example of what I mean is we say it without, we're being divisive and don't really realize we're doing it, because it's just everyday.
Because the intention, like you said, the intention is to say, okay, if you're saying we need or we're going to fail, you're saying you don't want people to think they're going to fail. So you think that saying that you're going to fail is what's going to inspire them, but it's actually causing them less motivation.
There you are. So again, knowing your audience. So going back to this one, all administrators need to get organized. They already know they need to get organized because they already made a mistake. So telling that doesn't solve the problem. And on the same page, they already knew they need to get on the same page, or this will fail. They already knew it was going to fail. So the goal here is it threat or inspiration? Is it going to hold? That's not inspiring them to move forward. It's not creating desire. You must figure out a solution, and again, unconsciously, that's bringing even though it's everyday talk, hey, you must find a solution. So how can we turn this around? All right. So all the administrators need to get organized. Hey, administrators, we did a great job. There was a lot of areas that needed, there was a lot of areas that we did well in, but we are all aware, so make it a group thing, that there's also areas that we need improvement on. Mm-hmm. See the difference? Now it's not you need to be organized. We're all aware, because they are all already aware, there are areas that we need improvement on. Most people don't like the word change. Change for some people is divisive. Oh, you need to change what you're doing. Babe, you got to improve. As a family, we need to improve on what we're doing to get to our goal, as an example, So, hey, so all the administrators, we did great, again, different ways. We did great in certain areas, but as you well know, there are other areas that we need to improve on, and we need to maximize our organization in that area. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So now we're unifying. Yeah. We're already acknowledging, I already know. And see, this is the difference between a leader and a dictator. The dictator say, oh, you need to. The leader is saying, hey, it's us working together. Service.
Taking accountability.
Right, man. We went back to defense versus service.
Yes.
I'm defending. We got to go do this. Service is, hey, we all did this together. Now let's find a way for us to get organized and on the same page. And instead of saying, or this will fail, in order to make this succeed.
So you want to end on a high note. Like, we're not thinking about the negative of failing, but the positive and inspiration of success. So I love it.
And every word has two words. They have a negative connotation and a positive connotation to it. That's where the challenge comes in.
Even with emails, when you're writing emails to folks in your language, ending on a note. I have a joke with all of my coworkers. Like, when I used to work in corporate America, the joke was, you can say anything you want, but if you end with have a sparkling day, then at least it makes the whole email happy, because you ended with that as a joke. But it's true. Just at the end, having gratitude, or to your point, giving the inspiration instead of saying this will fail.
Right. And changing the word from fail to succeed, going to a positive word. Another example might be, and I like to practice this on my daughter. So it works out very well, because if I can inspire her too, then I'm doing really well. I'm keeping it simple. So instead of saying don't run, because the mind doesn't hear the word don't.
They just hear run.
Don't run. And the child runs. You're like, I just told you don't run. Well, because we actually told them to run, because the brain doesn't interpret the don't. So I might say, instead of don't run, what are we really saying? What do we really want them to do? We want them to walk. Is that right?
So what do you say? Walk. You say to your daughter.
Say walk with focus, baby. Walk with focus.
I love that. We have some great comments and questions in the chat. Just to follow up with Galen, she said, sometimes the fear and insecurity in the receiver is where the fear is. As a leader, it's imperative to have emotional intelligence in every conversation. Powerful statement.
I agree with you 100%. And remember, it goes back to the definition of words.
Yes.
So the way the brain works is that if you really think, memory is nothing more than the past. Every memory is something from the past. So every movie, every situation we've seen, we've experienced, or anything that we've ever heard of, that accumulation is what creates our memory. So if you really think about memory, is a past. It is the past. I can't have a memory of the future unless I'm from a different time.
It triggers folks too.
That's right.
Languages can trigger people.
Exactly. So go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I was getting excited. It's true. Because, and you have to be sensitive. And if you see, like you said, the ouch factor, you say something and you start seeing that ouch on people's face, then you have to kind of change your tonality and your language.
Or find out what it was and even call it out. Say, hey, I just saw in your face that you reacted. What was that? And then you may find, and then now you're coming together, because if you don't fix that, it could have been the word could have been misinterpreted. They could have felt you were being threatening, even though you weren't. Oh, you need to make this happen. You have to do that. Here's what I've learned about language. It's very practical. Negativity is other, is outside. It's third person. So actually bring up that first one that we had. I'll give you an example.
Okay. I have another question too from Nicole. Nicole, we'll get to your question. I promise. It was a great one.
I'm sorry I get so passionate about this. It's just, so watch this one. So this was something someone wrote and I'll go back and tell you how I did it. It says, your complaints, your drama, your victim mentality, your want. This is like an inspirational post. All right. Your complaints, your drama, your victim mentality, your whining, your blaming, and all your excuses have never gotten you even a single step closer to your goals or dreams. Now watch this. Here's what happens with divisiveness. I don't complain. I don't bring drama. If you're that person, you just lost the person, and you just lost the purpose of that post. So if you're writing that, as an example, if a person's writing it, notice that's third person. If a person is writing that and they want people to read it, as soon as they say your drama, your victim mentality, I don't have that. They're going to scroll to the next thing and not read what you have to say, And then also, let's look at your excuses have never gotten you a single. It has never. That's again an example of what we talked about it earlier, using an absolute. Because if the person believes, well, I've complained before and gotten what I wanted, then you lost.
It doesn't apply to me.
And then it says, let go of your nonsense. It's about you. So the way it should read is, instead of saying your complaints, drama, whining, blaming, excuses, or a victim mindset has never gotten anyone a single. Notice it was anyone, it wasn't you.
Instead of you,
negativity is other people.
It makes it broader, and that's more unifying instead of attacking someone. Wow.
Exactly. And has never gotten anyone to a single step closer to their goals or dreams. Now watch this. Let go of your nonsense. When a person lets go of the nonsense and delusion of a something for nothing mindset, then they will create their future. No more excuses. Today's a new day. So the negativity is third person. The negativity is other people, some people. There's people out there, there's others. And then you should be things that uplift. I've seen an example might be, other people were tripping out today, but you had such a great spirit. Instead of saying, if you're a leader, you guys were acting up today. Well, I wasn't acting up. So now you just divided the people who in their mind thought they were acting up or not. Hey, there was a lot of people in this room today that were acting up. And those of you who weren't, I acknowledge you. I commend you for staying on that route. For those of you who were, let's figure out how we can not make this happen again. How can we work together as a team? Service. How can I, as a leader, how can I serve you to be sure that this never happens again?
That is powerful, and actually a great segue into our question from Nicole. She's saying, first of all, great topic. Thank you, Nicole, and everyone for joining us. How can we make sure our unifying language / behavior is recognized as sincere by others? And when you just said service, I thought that was a great way, but people know that you have a service attitude. You and I had a little example earlier before we started talking, where you may be saying one thing out of your mouth, but your actions are showing something different, and that's not going to be received as sincere. So give us some examples of how that can land more sincere.
First of all, are you that person or not? How do people view you? So if they were to view you as a sincere, caring person, then it's just a continuation of your nature. So now they accept it. Now, if you're like me, had to make this transition, because being in the military, it's all, you need to, you have to, you must, that type of language, and go over there and get that, and it's, and there's ways to put that down, like go over there and get that if you don't mind. Another thing about tonality, if you speak in a higher tone, it's more of a caring, but if you do, watch. Hey, go over there and get, can you go over there and get that? Go over there and get that. So when you do a higher tone, it comes out a little bit more peaceful than a lower tone, or a deeper one. So first of all, who are you is the next one. Number two, you can't please all the people all the time. No matter how good you are, no matter how much you care, there's always going to be someone who has a negative, pessimistic mindset because of their past. Remember, we talked about the story of the past. Yes. And that the way they interpret things from their past creates an emotion. That emotion is tied to a past event. Every emotion we feel, that's the way the ouch factor, again, is tied to a past event in our lives, a memory that we've heard, felt, seen, saw, or experienced. And so then we got to ask ourselves, why am I feeling ouch? Does that make sense?
I love that you said that, because this really, and Nicole, it's all about self-awareness first. You have to know how you're perceived by others. We've said perception is powerful. And if you are in a leadership role, or if you're in a role where you're supposed to unify folks, and you've heard feedback from multiple people and it's the same thing, then you really do need to do a self-evaluation. To your point, Lee, change your tone. Be a lot, if you are really stern, kind of take it softer. I had the opposite problem where people didn't take me seriously because I am always smiling and so happy. Where
You
I
also
had,
have a higher tone. You have a high tone or
so
tonality also
I had to
naturally.
take it down. I had to take
Yeah.
it down. I had to pause. I had to look people in their eye and let them know that I wasn't kidding, because it's the opposite. So very good
So,
example.
and one way to finish this, also that question is, first of all, as a recap, you can't please all the people all the time.
Yes.
As long as you know in your heart your intentions were right, and that you're coming off of it as a caring person, you go back, I did everything the way it's supposed to be by the book. That's fine. The third thing is you're the people who criticize you. Not 1 out of 10 will be constructive criticism, maybe 2 out of 10. But listen to them and ask them. So what about what I said caused you to react that way or to feel I was insincere? And find out, use it, and grow. So anytime someone acts that way, and they confront you, just say, hey, what was it about the speech that you felt was insincere, wasn't correct, and learn from it, implement it. And the fourth thing, so first, you can't please all the people. Make sure that, there I go again with make sure that. Always be focused on, be always focused that the intentions are correct. And if you're that person, great. Number 3 is ask that person, hey, what's going on? Why is that? And the fourth one is, if in the past, someone on this line has been the type of person where people says you're very firm and you're very this and that, and you can tell when when a person's divisive, whether it's on accident or purpose. What's the outcome of your conversations? If you're having a conversation, you notice every time there's a conversation that takes place, people get divided, they run away, or they get upset. Then there was some type of language, whether it was your fault or the other person's fault. It's irrelevant. If we're the speaker, it is our obligation to appeal to our audience, because we're here to serve, not here to have my agenda. So it's okay. So the fourth one is just let people know that you're moving on. Say, hey, I learned something valuable this week on this webinar. I learned that I unintentionally was using words like you must, you need, to try to get people to move. I was using threat language. I didn't realize it was threat because it was everyday language and fear. And I'm going to be using more unifying language. And I made mistakes in my language in the past. And so I'm moving on today from what I've learned. And please, if anytime you feel this language or you feel this type of feeling, then let me know where it was at, and I'll get in touch with Lisa. I'll send an email, say, hey, this is what happened here. Can you give me some language that would have fixed that, and grow from it? Remember, one conversation today isn't going to change. It's going to be like an instant change. There's this thing called the education continuum that a friend of mine put together. His name is Andy Tanner, and he's actually a rich dad advisor for Robert Kiyosaki. He's actually one of my mentors, and he's the one that's taught me a lot about this stuff about language over the last several years. But he made this education continuum that says everyone starts off with not knowing, ignorance. And see, that's another word with definition. Ignorance could be positive in people's mind, because of all the relations to the past, what ignorant means, or it could be the definition, which is lack of knowledge. So you go from ignorance to awareness. This call is probably going to bring awareness to it.
Yes.
You go from awareness to competency. Competency means you can talk about it. You start to see what's going on. You start to recognize it. And then you move into, and that's basically, I can take a test. Like, say, okay, circle all the divisive language or negative language in here, and you can circle it. But what takes practice is moving from competency to proficiency, and that's practice. So the more this is going to be a practice thing. And here's something else for encouragement. It's not going to happen overnight. I read a book called Atomic Habits, and it said,
I read that too.
Yeah, you read that. Yes. The reason why people fail is because when they have a goal, let's say the goal is to use the right language, they'll go through what's called a valley of despair. The valley of despair is the disappointment. It didn't happen as quickly as I thought it would happen. And that's where people quit. So to avoid the valley of despair as much as possible, only focus on, notice I said don't focus on, only focus on, again, unifying language, only using positive, only focus on getting 1% better every single day. And if a person takes away the pressure, 1% better, they'll get there. Here's the other word of encouragement. Neuroscience today has shown that it takes 63 days to take a new idea that was unconscious and make it, take a new idea and move it to the unconscious. Remember, we talked about earlier, we have things inside of us that causes us to react from our past. That's unconscious. I use the word ignorant or ignorant. For some people, it brings up negative emotions. For some people, it doesn't. It's just a neutral word. So you feel an ouch factor. Why did that bother me? It's for whatever the past is. To move that to where it doesn't bother anyone anymore, or to change an unconscious thinking and make it, to remove it and to create a new unconscious way of thinking, takes 63 days. Why? It's 21 days to create a new habit, but it takes another 42 days for the neurons in the mind to grow into like roots of a tree, to move into the unconscious. So that way, that new way of thinking and believing becomes an unconscious decision, not a conscious decision. When we can move to unconscious competence, then that means it's natural and automatic. So if you notice someone says something to you, you immediately react. It's an unconscious, it's something that's unconsciously in us, that's rooted, that causes us to react. To change that takes about 63 days. Now, what's the positive in that? If we know it's 63 days, then we don't quit. We don't give up because it didn't happen in a week or two. We realize it's a process. It's a journey to make it new. And when we have the science behind it, it's so much easier to make these changes. So going back to recapping what she said, the question, you can't please everyone, as long as you know your intentions are correct. Number 3, ask for feedback. And number 4, just announce to the world that, hey, I'm moving on into something better, and help me go through this process as I learn and grow. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen as we work together. Again, unifying language.
Wow. Well, Lee, I just thank you so much. This has been such a phenomenal conversation. And thank you all for listening. The comments in the chat have been so positive. Everyone's like, they love this. They've learned so much. And if you would like to connect with Lee, he's on all social media sources. You can certainly catch him on at Lee Escobar. And you have a book out, and you're coming out with a course.
Yeah, I have a book coming out. It's already done. And I'm very grateful and thankful that actually Robert Kiyosaki forwarded the book for me. And so, yeah, just such a blessing. And so we're just in the process with their team right now, waiting for the for some graphics and to get done, some illustrations, and actually get it done. So very thankful for that. It's just been a wonderful journey from one day sitting watching an infomercial, 16 years later to where I am.
And this is that's where it starts. Like, you, Lee, myself, people who, we're not any better than anyone else. It is that building those habits, networking, continuing where you're sitting right now. You can be where your desire is in no time. Just start, and it starts with unifying and doing things like this and connecting. So it's such an inspiration. I love that you shared your story. Did you have any final closing comments for everyone listening today?
Man, the comment is, I can talk for hours about this, and 30 minutes doesn't do it justice. And that's why I was talking fast, trying to get as much out as possible, because I know we're limited on time. And just as a recap of things, number 1, come from a place of service in a conversation. How can I make your life better? Not defense. I have to prove my point. So how can I serve you? Part of doing that is our language, which is instead of threat, instead of you must do it, say, hey, create desire. Is this something you want to do? Would you enjoy, would you enjoy solving the problem that we just had right now? Yes, I want, instead of you need to solve it. So instead of you need, enjoy, would be beneficial, those positive words. If there's ever an ouch factor, usually it's definition. Make sure we're on the same definition. And you can see it on people's face. Say, hey, that ouched you a little bit. What was that ouched you? And then talk about it so you can bring it together. Negativity is other people. We only use second person, like you, for inspiration or something that needs to be done to unify. Third person is negativity. Those people, there's people who are not acting right, and those people weren't acting right. So we got to solve this together. Again, and then, remember, it takes time to take this new information and actually move it to the unconscious. And the best way is through practice. Realize you're not going to be perfect overnight. The only thing that made me a little bit better at this compared to some people, there's people so much better than me than this, is just that I get to go on stage and practice it and focus on it. And I have a group of mentors and people around me who take my tapes, review them, and go through them and say, okay, this is where you met. I said that. It's like, yeah, and it's so unconscious that we don't, like, I didn't say that. And they were like, yes, you did. Here's a recording of it. I'm like, man, you're absolutely right. And so, because it's unconscious nature for some of us. But the first step is awareness, and awareness is the first step for change.
So true, so powerful. Once again, Lee Escobar, thank you. Catch him on IG. When the book is released, I'll be sure to share it as well as the course. And thank all of you for taking the time out. You know, time is an indispensable, non-renewable source. So thank you for taking your time to learn this. Hopefully we've added some value to you. We look forward to seeing you next week on Speaker Circle. Let's continue to grow together.
All right.